All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're talking about a guy whose face you almost certainly recognize, but whose full story, well, it's way more interesting and creative than you might think. This is all about Patrick Muldoon's evolution, from a screen icon to a real powerhouse behind the camera.
I mean, come on, for anyone who grew up in the 90s, this face is pure nostalgia. He was that perfect leading man, you know? The bad boy, the sci-fi hero. He was just everywhere on our screens, pretty much defining a whole era of TV and movies.
And that's really where our story kicks off. Because while we were all watching him on TV, he was busy building these whole other creative lives. One as a rock musician, and later as a really successful film producer. So what was actually going on behind that famous face?
So let's start where most of us first met him. He basically exploded into pop culture in the early 90s. And man, he very quickly became a huge star. This timeline really maps out his incredible rise. So in 1992, he becomes the original Austin Reed on Days of Our Lives. That role made him a daytime TV sensation. Then he jumps to primetime as the totally villainous Richard Hart on Melrose Place. And by 97, he's in space fighting giant bugs as Xander Barcalau in the sci-fi classic Starship Troopers. What a decade of just iconic, high-profile roles.
Okay, but here's the first major twist in the story. While he was becoming one of the most famous actors of the decade, he was also pouring a ton of his energy into a completely different passion.
Yep, you heard that right. Away from all the cameras and the movie sets, Patrick Muldoon was fronting a rock band. And listen, this wasn't just some casual hobby. This was a serious musical project that he chased for years, writing, recording, the whole deal.
And this was a long-term thing, for sure. He formed the band with Neil Graham Ives, and they put out 2 full albums in the 2000s. But what's really cool is that the passion never went away. In 2015, they actually got back together for a new EP, and he even released his first solo single, I Believe, that same year. It just goes to show you, this was a truly lifelong creative outlet for him.
And this is a perfect example of how his music was finding its own success. Getting a song placed in a feature film and on a massive hit show like The Hills, that shows you that the Sleeping Masses had a real reach and appeal all on its own, totally separate from his acting career.
So all this creative drive, it flows right into the next major phase of his career. As his on-screen roles kept coming, Muldoon started making a very deliberate, very strategic shift, moving from being in front of the camera to becoming a real player behind it.
Now, this wasn't an accident. It was a totally calculated career move. Right after Melrose Place, he scores a development deal with the legendary Spelling Entertainment. He starts by co-producing TV, really learning the ropes. Then he takes a huge step up as head of development at Storyboard. And finally, he starts executive producing the kinds of big-name films we see today.
Okay, this slide is fascinating because it visually shows you everything about his career shift. In 1997, it's just actor. Simple. By 2015, producer gets added to his acting credit. But then, you see the real change. For major films like The Card Counter and Riff Raff, his credit is solely executive producer. This chart just lays it all out, his successful journey from star to strategist.
And this all brings us to the final chapter of his story, where his work as a producer was really hitting its stride, cementing a powerful legacy in the world of independent film.
His career was still very much climbing. I mean, just days before he passed away, he was on social media posting with real excitement about his latest project, a major crime thriller called Cockroach that was in the middle of filming.
So, to get a sense of the scale of this project, just look at this cast. As an executive producer, he was working with some of the absolute biggest names in Hollywood. This wasn't just some small indie film. It was a testament to how far he'd come and the level of respect he commanded as a real power player behind the scenes.
On April 19, 2026, Patrick Muldoon passed away from a heart attack. He was only 57 years old, leaving behind this incredible and diverse creative journey that was, by all accounts, still very much in progress. This quote from his own website really feels like his personal mission statement, doesn't it? It perfectly captures that fun-loving personality we all saw on screen, but also that deep-down commitment to the work of entertainment, whether it was through acting, music, or producing.
And that kind of leaves us with this final thought about legacy. Patrick Muldoon was so much more than the 90s icon a lot of us remember. He was a musician, a creator, and a film producer who was at the very top of his game. And when you know the whole story, that full creative evolution, it gives you a much richer and honestly, a more complete picture of who he really was.